All right, I need my kids. I need a little help from them. So they're going to come up and they're going to hold the sign so they can instruct y'all when we need to yay, ah, boo. Yeah. So can you guys come up here, please? Huh? No? Oh. No, you want to be this for me? Okay. You ready, guys? Okay. All right. Okay, here we go. Ahasuerus, the king of Persia and Media, threw a 180-day party to all the officials of his 127-province worldwide empire. Upon completion of this party, he threw yet another party for the inhabitants of his new capital city, Shushan. All were invited to this grand bash, from the highest nobleman to the lowliest peasant. His wife, Queen Vashti, threw a party of her own for the noblewomen of Persia and Media. On the seventh and final day of the party, when the king was somewhat inebriated, he called for Queen Vashti to appear in her crown, only her crown, and parade in front of the men at his party. Her refusal infuriated Ahasuerus, and his anger burnt within him. Her refusal to obey the king's request threatened Ahasuerus in two ways. Who can respect a king who cannot even rule in his own house? Perhaps the women of the empire would follow the queen's lead and disobey their husbands. The king's advisors recommended swift punishment for Vashti. Not only was Vashti put to death, but also her story was to be written into the royal constitution. Letters were to be sent to all the provinces. No women would ever repeat Vashti's mistake. The king had decreed that every man should rule in his home and speak the language of his people. Not surprisingly, Ahasuerus began to feel lonely without his dear Vashti. It was time to find a new queen. But where would Ahasuerus look for his new queen? Enter the advisors. Let the king appoint commissioners in all the provinces of his kingdom to gather together every beautiful young maiden to Shushan, the capital, a beauty pageant, in the royal harem under the charge of Heth. These fair maidens would undergo 6 months of oil and myrrh treatment, followed by 6 months of cosmetic treatment. Only then would each girl have her own personal audience with Ahasuerus. There was a Jew by the name of Mordecai, who had been exiled from Jerusalem to Shushan by Nebuchadnezzar. He had reared his niece, Esther, ever since her parents had died. She was as charming as she was beautiful and found favor in the eyes of all who met her. And it is every girl's childhood dream to marry into royalty, to be the richest queen in the entire world. Every girl except Esther. But there was no avoiding the king's decree. After 4 years of hiding, Esther was taken against her will to the king's harem. And when it came her turn to come before Ahasuerus, although she had requested no special perfumes or cosmetics, the king was so taken with her that he immediately set the royal crown upon her head and pronounced her as his queen. He made a great feast in her honor and declared a holiday for all the provinces. Following Mordecai's instructions, Esther kept her ancestry hidden. Ahasuerus did not even suspect that she was of Jewish descent. Now Ahasuerus was not loved by all his royal subjects, and two of his chamberlains, Bigsan and Teresh, planned to assassinate him. Mordecai just happened to be outside the gate of the king's palace, and he overheard them plotting. Mordecai informed Esther of their attempted treason, and she promptly informed the king, mentioning, of course, that it was Mordecai who had thwarted their plans. The matter was investigated and corroborated, and both Bigsan and Teresh were hanged. The incident was recorded in the king's book of Chronicles and was then promptly forgotten. Suddenly, as if from nowhere, a new player arrives on the stage, Haman. He quickly advanced in the political hierarchy, and ultimately the king himself promoted him and placed him above all his fellow officers. According to the king's command, all would bow down and prostrate themselves before Haman. Mordecai, however, refused to participate in this new Haman worshiping cult. The king's servants tried to warn Mordecai, but he refused to heed their words. When Haman became aware of the defiance of this Jew, he was filled with rage. However, it seemed contemptible to him to lay his hands on Mordecai alone. He would die together with his people, the Jewish people. That was Haman's plan. The only thing that remained was to pick a lucky date for an annihilation to begin. In the 12th year of Ahasuerus' reign, in the month of Nisan, Haman cast lots. Adar was Haman's lucky month. And the the lucky month, and the 13th was his lucky date. Haman now had 12 months to make his plan a reality. Haman then approached the king. There is a certain people scattered throughout and dispersed among all the provinces in your realm. Their laws are different. They do not observe the king's laws. The king should not tolerate them. Haman was ready to pay Ahasuerus 10,000 silver talents, the equivalent of 750 tons of silver, for the right to the lives of the entire Jewish nation. Ahasuerus removed his signet ring and gave it to Haman to write an edict for the destruction of the entire Jewish people and to have it sealed with the king's signet ring. And as for the money, said the king, keep it. Letters were sent out by courier to every province. Happy with their new plan, the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the Jews of Shushan were confused and bewildered. When Mordecai learned of the threat, he tore his clothes and donned sackcloth and ashes. The Jews throughout the provinces followed suit with fasting and weeping. Mordecai sent a message to Esther, bidding her to appeal to the king on behalf of her people. It is well known, Esther replied, that anyone who approaches the king without being summoned is put to death, and I have not been summoned for the past 30 days. Who knows, replied Mordecai, whether it was for just such an opportunity as this that you attained your royal position. Esther agreed to try, but with one condition. Mordecai was to gather all the Jews in Shushan and declare a 3-day-long public fast. Esther, together with her maids, would also fast. Only then, she said, will I go, and if I perish, I perish. Esther approached the king's chambers. As she stood in the inner courtyard, Ahasuerus noticed her. She won his favor, and he extended his golden scepter to her. What is your wish, Queen Esther? Up to half of my kingdom I will grant you. Esther did not request half of his kingdom. All she asked was that Ahasuerus come together with Haman to a private banquet later that day. Later, at this little feast, Ahasuerus, sensing that Esther was leading up to something, repeated his offer to Esther. What is your request? Up to half of my kingdom, and I shall grant it to you. Again, Esther replied that all she desired was that the king, together with Haman, attend yet another banquet the following day. When Haman left the party, he was euphoric. Just the king and queen and Haman. Oh, what an honor. But as he left the palace, he saw that arrogant Mordecai. Who refused to stand up for him or bow down to him. Haman told his wife and sons all the honor that had been accorded to him. But all this is worthless to me, he continued, as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. Haman's wife, Zeresh, had the answer. Let a gallows be made 50 cubits high, and tomorrow morning speak to the king and have them hang Mordecai, yay and boo, on it. Haman was pleased with this plan and was so eager to carry it out that he immediately had the gallows constructed. That night, Ahasuerus was unable to fall asleep, so he ordered to be brought before him the king's book of Chronicles and had it read before him. The royal story readers chanced to open the book at the long-forgotten chapter, the story of how Mordecai had saved the king's life. What honor has been bestowed upon Mordecai? Asked the king. Nothing has been done for him, answered the king's pages. Just then, Haman happened to be standing in the outer court of the palace. Not wanting to lose a moment, he had come to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai. Yay and boo. Ahasuerus ordered for him to be brought in. What should be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor? Asked Ahasuerus. So Haman, thinking that there could be no one who the king would want to honor more than him, saw the opportunity to have his dream made a reality. Dress him in the king's robes and have him ride on the king's horse with a royal crown on his head. Then have one of the king's most noble officers parade him through the city square. Oh, what an honor, thought Haman. Then hurry, said the king, get the robe and the horse and do as you have suggested. For Mordecai, the Jew. Haman returned home, dejected and despondent, and told over the day's events to his wife Zeresh and to his advisors. Zeresh saw that there was no hope and forecast his downfall. If Mordecai is of Jewish descent, then you will not prevail. As Esther's second party, Ahasuerus once more repeated his offer. What is your request, Queen Esther? What is your petition? Up to half of my kingdom, and I will grant it to you. The time was right. Esther replied, if I won your favor, let my life be granted to me as my request and my people as my petition. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, slain, and annihilated. Ahasuerus was taken by surprise. Who is this one who dared to do this? An adversary, an enemy, she replied. This wicked Haman. As Haman trembled in terror, the king rose in anger and went out to the palace garden, leaving Haman to beg Esther for his life. Ahasuerus returned to find Haman prostrated on the couch upon which Esther was sitting. Would he actually assault the queen while I am in the house? Stormed Ahasuerus. At that point, Carbona, one of the chamberlains in attendance, informed the king that the 50-cubit gallows which Haman had built for Mordecai was ready and waiting and would be perfect for Haman. Then hang him on it, ordered the king. So Haman was hanged on the very same gallows which he had prepared for Mordecai. Now Esther and Mordecai were in favor with Ahasuerus. He gave Haman's entire estate to Esther and placed Mordecai over it. Sorry, guys, 1 second. Okay. Esther approached the king and begged him to avert the evil decree which Haman had brought about. An edict signed with the royal signet ring cannot be revoked, said Ahasuerus. But he handed the signet ring to Mordecai and Esther and told them that they may write whatever they desired. Mordecai ordered for letters to be sent to the Jews in all the provinces, stating that the king had given permission for the Jews of every province to prepare their defense against anyone who may attack or threaten them. The fate of the Jewish nation had been turned around, from destruction to salvation, from dejection to honor, from sorrow to gladness. So the Jews organized their defense. Those in the provinces succeeded in fighting off their attackers on the 13th of Adar, and so celebrated on the 14th. However, the Jews of the capital, Shushan, took until the end of the 14th to fight off their enemies, and so their celebration took place on the 15th of Adar. Haman's 10 sons were hanged, and their enemies were destroyed, but the Jews did not lay their hands on the spoils. The Jewish nation accepted upon themselves to celebrate these 2 days without fail at the proper time each year. Aside from the feasting, they were to send delicacies to one another and gifts to the poor. That was how Purim would be remembered for generations to come. Mordecai had been promoted to the position of viceroy to the king. He was respected by all and was able to take care of the welfare and posterity of his people. The end. Yay!